What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you my top 5 meta decks for the February 2018 format. Now, obviously there's a big caveat to this because I'm no oracle by any means and I can't predict the future in knowing what the best decks are going to be because the February 2018 ban list just went into effect as of today, February 5th, so no one knows what the best deck is at the current moment. But based off of how the list is shaping up, what decks are currently available to us in the given card pool, and based off trends we've seen before, I want to provide you guys with my initial feedback as to what I've noticed and what I feel are going to be the strongest decks moving into this format. So keep in mind this is subjective, but it's all in good fun. But before we get into that, I want to give a big shout out to my newest patrons as always. So big shout outs today to Scott as well as Fez. You guys are the reason that this channel is growing strong. And if you guys want to help support me and the channel through Patreon, then check out the Patreon link in the description below. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting off with number 5. This is a deck we haven't really seen a lot of ever since SPYRAL pretty much completely dominated the meta, and that deck is Paleozoic Frogs. Now there's a reason I have Paleozoic Frogs on here, and that basically goes in tandem with the fact that SPYRAL was checked to an extent on the recent February 2018 ban list, and the reason for that is because SPYRAL Resort went to 1. While SPYRAL Resort going to 1 doesn't necessarily utterly kill SPYRAL as a whole, what it does allow is other decks to thrive because of how oppressive of a card SPYRAL Resort was in the format. The fact that this card basically denied all targeting of SPYRAL monsters really shut down a majority of decks from being able to conduct multiple forms of their disruption because most of their disruption was targeting effects. And now I know this is 2018 and we shouldn't really be complaining about that, but at the same time, when a card like that is a field spell, it's at 3 and you've got terraforming and other means to search and access this card, it gets a little bit oppressive. So Paleozoic Frogs, I actually feel, have an opportunity to shine here. Now the reason for this is very simple. I feel that with this new format, back row is going to become important again because now that SPYRAL is going to be pretty much taken down a notch because of the fact SPYRAL Resort went to 1, SPYRAL Sleeper was essentially the reason why back row decks had such a difficult time thriving, because you would basically lose 2 of your back row as soon as you set them going second, and then you lose an additional 2 back row on your opponent's follow-up turn, meaning you just lost 4 cards and your opponent didn't have to expend any resources just because of SPYRAL Sleeper and how powerful of a card that he is. But now with SPYRAL being in check, I don't think there's going to be nearly as much SPYRAL in the meta, which means a deck like Paleozoic has an opportunity to become relevant again. You guys have to remember, it wasn't too long ago that Paleozoic was actually considered the best deck of the format, and that's because Paleozoic is a very strong deck going first and going second. If you're going first, not only do you have access to Totally Awesome, but you also have access to just set 5 pass, and you have 5 things to disrupt your opponent during their turn. But Paleozoic is actually an okay deck going second now that a card like SPYRAL Sleeper is out of the meta. There isn't really any other card necessarily like Sleeper that can really take its place that gives Paleozoic that difficult of a time in getting its engine going. And because of that, Paleozoic can play the game it likes to play by just chipping away, grinding it out, and also getting its advantage off of each one of its trap cards. And with all these other trap cards back into the meta, like Bottomless Trap Hole, as well as Solemn Judgment, we have some of the most powerful trap cards in the game available to us. And not to mention, you can take advantage of all these other powerful trap cards like Floodgates. We still have Dimensional Barrier, which is going to be very relevant, which you'll see a little bit later. I definitely think there's an opportunity here to be seized with Paleozoic Frog. We'll have to see, but I definitely think it's a strong contender and something you should definitely keep your eye on if you're attending any competitive events. Now moving on to number 4. We just mentioned it in the last one, but I have SPYRAL in the number 4 slot. SPYRAL Resort going to 1 definitely hinders the deck a lot, but I do think there still is a lot of potential for SPYRAL to thrive in the format, because you have to realize SPYRAL Resort, as good of a card as it was, it doesn't necessarily put a nail in the coffin for the deck, because SPYRAL Tough and SPYRAL Super Agent are 2 incredibly powerful cards when used together, and SPYRAL Double Helix is still absolutely legal and is still capable of producing the OTK, assuming you don't draw that one of SPYRAL Resort, so that you can combo off with Master Plan and do the things that SPYRAL is very characteristic and known for doing at this time. So you have to realize that SPYRAL has, as we've seen in the end of the previous format, is very capable of evolving. We saw Dark SPYRAL variants starting to pop up. We could see variants with Brilliant Fusion soon coming up. SPYRAL might even cater to going back to a going first build that's much more combo-centric, that's able to achieve boards of Tri-Gate Wizard, SPYRAL Sleeper, multiple negates, things like that, compared to the going second build of the past, but is still able to go second because of a card like SPYRAL Tough and things like that. Now the thing is, SPYRAL definitely had a massive hit with consistency with SPYRAL Resort going to 1, because not only did you lose 2 copies of Resort, but now you're kind of disinclined to play Terraforming as a whole, because you really don't want to see this copy of SPYRAL Resort unless you're comboing off and OTKing your opponent in that turn. Double Helix is still an amazing card. All of the SPYRAL cards as a whole are incredibly powerful in their own right, and I definitely don't think this deck is dead by any stretch of the imagination. Again, we'll have to see, but I think this is something you definitely don't want to take off the radar, even though SPYRAL Resort went to 1. Now moving on to number 3. This is a deck I was not anticipating to put on this list, not even at this high on the list at that. And that deck is 60 card Lightsworn Shiranui. Now, I was thinking long and hard about this list because there's so many different decks that are actually viable right now, it's kind of hard to figure out like which ones are really that much better than the rest. But I think 60 card Lightsworn Shiranui actually makes the cut because this is a deck that was going toe-to-toe against SPYRAL and against Pendulum Magician before Electromite, of course, and was actually able to top a YCS several times. The deck is still incredibly powerful. You've got access to cards like Double Omega. You've got access now to Curious, the Lightsworn Link monster just released in Extreme Force. It has easy access to Saryuja. There's so many incredibly powerful starter cards in the deck like Lonefire Blossom, Protoplant Orphis Scorpio, Brilliant Fusion. You've got Grass, you've got Left Arm Offering. You have so many incredibly powerful starter cards that if your opponent doesn't have ways to respond to all of them, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And now with SPYRAL Resort going to 1, Fairy Tail Snow is much more powerful than it was before, since it's able to target anything basically in the meta outside of SPYRAL. And then you've also got the fact that it just has one of the widest ranges when it comes to the extra deck utility and toolboxing, because you've got access to the rank 4 toolbox, you've got access to so many just powerful components here that I really feel that even combined with the fact that you might get lucky and mill some wolves every now and then, not to mention Damage Juggler going to 1 as well, which can kind of throw Clown Blade back into the mix a little bit here too, I think there's a lot of potential for Lightsworn to do very, very well this format. This is a very dangerous deck, especially when piloted by the correct player, and this is something I expect to see do very well in the coming weeks. Now moving on to number 2, this is a deck that was absolutely unscathed by the ban list. This is a deck that no one thought was going to survive, and that deck is Trickstar. Now, a lot of people, myself included, were calling for a card like Trickstar Reincarnation to go to 1 on the ban list, but somehow the deck is still able to play 3 copies of this card and 3 copies of Droll and Lockbird. Now, obviously, there's more to it than that because the deck doesn't live or die by the Droll and Lockbird combo. I mean, you've got an amazing 1-card engine in Candina. The deck has access to utilizing a wide variety of different cards because it's very adaptable and flexible depending on the meta. You can play stuff like Scapegoat, and now you've got plenty of other tools at your disposal as well that were moved from the limited list, basically just coming into this new format. So there's a lot of really cool things that Trickstars can do. The reason I have them so high on the list is because of the fact that Trickstar Reincarnation is one of the most powerful disruptive tools in this game, and the fact that it's searchable through a main engine component in Trickstar Candina, through Trickstar Lightstage, and through Terraforming. So when you kind of put everything together, I'm really valuing consistency here over just how high a ceiling of a deck can go in terms of power, and that's why Trickstar, I feel, has to be number 2 on this list, because it's tried and true, it's consistent, it was able to go toe-to-toe with SPYRAL, it's a very strong deck, it was even able to go toe-to-toe with full power SPYRAL before it got hit at YCS Dallas. I definitely think this is going to be one of the most popular decks moving into this format. Now before we get on to number 1, I did have one honorable mention I did want to throw out there, and that deck is ABC. Now ABC is kind of one of those decks that, you know, it was able to go toe-to-toe with SPYRAL, Pendulum Magician, and Trickstar, and it was actually able to hold its own in some instances. The deck's a little fragile fragile, but it's another deck that was able to escape the ban list unharmed for the most part. And I think that's a really big deal because with Terraforming still at 3, a lot of people weren't expecting that. I think this is another deck that you're going to see have a surge in popularity. While it may not be the strongest deck of the format, it's something you definitely want to consider going into any competitive event. But moving on to my number 1 deck of February 2018. If you haven't already figured it out, it's got to be Pendulum Magician. Now, a lot of people, with the banning of Joker and Double Iris Magician, were thinking that Pendulum Magician were not going to be as strong as they possibly could have been. And while that may be true, this deck is still incredibly consistent. Electromite does so much for this deck that it is absolutely absurd in combo with Astrograph Sorcerer, which is still at 3, by the way. So even though the deck took a major hit to consistency with Joker and Double Iris getting banned, the deck is still incredibly powerful and is probably going to be the strongest deck moving into this new format. Now, the deck isn't unbeatable. That's one thing about this deck. It probably can produce some of the strongest going first boards, and going second it can play rather well at the same time. But the deck also has probably more weaknesses than a lot of top decks have had in the past by comparison. It can get blown out by a ton of different cards, and I think that's where the opportunity is for some of these other decks that might not be on this top 5 list, or maybe that are on this list, have an opportunity to capitalize and have a shot at victory going up against this deck. You definitely don't want to sleep on this deck at all, but you definitely need to be aware that going into this format, Pendulum Magician is 100% going to be the deck to beat. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about your top choices moving into the February 2018 format. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always. Subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. And if you found this video informative, consider backing me on Patreon, because just by pledging only $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.